podcast. My name is Todd Brown, and I'm here with Robert Peak. Hello,
Hey,
Robert.
Todd. Hey.
Hey, Robert. And our goal in this podcast series is to give you the benefit of our experience as practitioners of this methodology that we call getting things done, or GTD, and also as people who work with clients as coaches, as seminar leaders, as consultants to help them to enable the promise of GTD, which is what we call stress-free productivity. Um, and Robert, when you and I were talking about what to talk about, as we so often do in preparation for these things, one of the things that we thought would be a really interesting intersection would be this question of, well, the general question around delegation and how do we think about delegation in GTD? What does best practice look like? Number one, and then number two, at the same time, given how the world has changed recently and the introduction of more and more, AI tools, how does that change the picture if it does? And what can we say at this point in obviously a rapidly evolving space around delegation supported by AI? So I think what I'll do is maybe just kick off by talking about just in general, so not an AI specific kind of thing, but just in general, how we think about delegation when it comes to getting things done. And the first thing I suppose to note, especially for those of you who are maybe not that familiar with GTD, we use the word delegation in a little bit of a special way, a unique way. And what I mean by that is um, when we talk about delegation, we don't just mean I'm giving things to uh, people who work for me to do. Okay, I'm delegating down, as it were, in the organization. We're not only talking about that. Delegation, in the way that we use the word, is giving things or expecting things from other people, regardless of where they are, sort of in the hierarchy. So it could be, yes, it could be that someone that works for you if you have management responsibility, but it could also be somebody who's a peer, let's say, in the organization. And yes, you can delegate upwards. You can ask things of your management and their management, et cetera. So that's, I suppose, a very important caveat to put out there to begin with. Delegation is 180 degrees. It's not just downwards. Beyond that, delegation, there are a few things that come to, that I think are important around delegation best practice and getting things done. One is to be really clear what is delegated, right? So, and this is where you get into conversation again, whether it's digital or whether it's face to face or online. But there needs to be agreement, right? What have I delegated and what am I expecting back? Or if someone's delegated something to me, what have I delegated and what am I expecting back? And quite often, this is where making use of good clear language can be very helpful, right? I'm expecting you to deliver a project, for example, and here is a description of the outcome of the project. And the more specific I can be, or that we can be in that conversation, the more efficient we'll be, of course, and also the more that we expect that the delivered product, whenever it shows up, will actually be what's expected. So it reduces inefficiency and increases effectiveness overall. Um, so that's one thing. And the other thing, and this goes to a lot of best practices in GTD, once things have been delegated, it's really important that they are registered somewhere, right? That we organize a reminder about the fact that we have delegated something. So we talk in GTD about the power of a list that we call the waiting for list. And a waiting for list is a list of things that I am waiting for other people to do for me, right? I've sent an email, I'm waiting for a response. I've ordered something online, I'm waiting for it to be delivered, etc. So, and the idea around tracking those waiting for situations is, it's two things. One sort of goes without saying, but yeah, it sets me up so that I can go and follow up with that person if I don't hear back from them. So it supports me in doing some sort of a chasing activity at some point if that's appropriate. But at the same time, a subtler but no less important advantage, I would argue, is the fact that once I've registered that waiting for in my system, my brain gets to relax about it. I get to forget for now the fact that that's something that I'm waiting for, because I know I'm going to interact with my system. I know I'm going to see that waiting for reminder in the future. And therefore, until then, my brain can let go. And that's, in my experience of coaching and working with clients over the years, I think an awful lot of the mental noise for a lot of people comes from the fact that they're attempting, unsuccessfully, given the limitations that we know that the brain has, but they're attempting to carry their waiting fors around in their heads. And that leads to a lot of stress, a lot of inefficiency, a lot of, suboptimal performance all around, I think. So, so if I were just going to paint, kind of the whole delegation topic in a bit of a broad brush, with a bit of a broad brush, that's what I would say. And now I'm interested to hear what you think I've left out, or if there's anything you'd highlight or add there.
No, I think that's great, Todd, as an overview of how we delegate to, as you said, colleagues, people above us, people that report to us. Um, and one of the fundamental things about delegating to others is, of course, that they're not necessarily going to do it instantly. And so, as a result, being able to acknowledge that you're ultimately responsible for that final outcome, that you're in the, Racier-Rasky model, you're somewhere, with a degree of accountability for making this happen, or you care about this thing happening to some degree, and that you are turning over either a discrete component, a next action to someone, or delegating the project. And I smiled when you said they're not always direct reports, because I was just looking at a project delegated. That's a project that my wife agreed to take on for us, and she'll be drawing heavily on me for information and so forth to complete the project. But she said, "Yeah, I'm on point to make sure this thing happens." And by no means is that anything other than a collegial cross tracking of who's doing what in the family, right? That's all that is. Um, when it comes to AI agents, and increasingly agents that are using large language models as their predominant way of doing stuff for us, because they can respond to natural language with natural language, or even text, images, other things like PDF documents, etc. Because that relationship and interface is one that we're so familiar with, called writing something like we would an email to a colleague. um, there's a way in which we are kind of delegating now to AI agents, but I think it's really important to point out the mechanics of having to track that, because it's going to take a long time, may not be there, but the fundamental underlying assumption that you're on the hook for it ultimately being a good result is very much there. And particularly in the programming world, there's this emerging notion of what they're calling vibe coding, which is just kind of prompting and reprompting an LLM till you get a more or less good enough working bit of software, right? And having been in software engineering for 20 plus years, I can tell you that's probably not going to be the kind of software you're going to want to put into a satellite control system, or anything like that, right? So there's the fundamental question of what is good enough, right? And what does that mean? And you are still ultimately always on the hook for the good enough part. So that's one of the ways in which I see it being very similar, right? That it's about you getting it done through someone or something else. But of course, as I said, that whole component of it being more instantaneous is a major difference. Yeah.
And that I think is a really fascinating thing that I hadn't really thought about that much until you and I started talking about it. But of course you're right. I mean, you prompt some sort of an AI and you get a response back pretty much straight away. Whereas if in the old world, um, you might have asked somebody to put together a report or do some research or whatever, and there would be the expectation that, yeah, this is going to take a while. So that's a way, obviously, that the world has changed, has sort of changed already. what have you seen out there in terms of well, not to put you too much on the spot, but maybe I will put you a little bit on the spot. So, as you think about your own GTD practice, can you come up with some specific ways in which you're using, and which you're, either delegating to LLMs, or maybe using AI in some sort of a creative way more generally in the delegation process?
Yeah, absolutely. So we're actually working right now, as you know, at Next Action Associates on some prompts, some engineered prompts that you can use to support you in your GTD practice, and those will be coming out later this year. We're still kind of going to be refining them and honing them over time, but I have been playing with those as ways to support me with clarifying thorny issues, I would say. And one of the things that AI is really, really good at, because it is sort of instant feedback, is getting you started, overcoming inertia, and getting you into momentum. And one of the ways, we do this in GTD is to coach people to, first of all, make a next action bite-sized, but also to lower the stakes such that you're really just getting going with the thing. So I never say write, I always say draft, right? It's a simple, silly little trick, that tricks my mind into going, I can write a draft. It's, it'll just be a draft. And the next thing you know, you're off and writing, and then you're revising, and then you're whatever, and then you're polishing, and so forth. So likewise, large language models are pretty good at giving you just a draft, just something rough, just some ideas, just some thoughts. So prompting the large language models to help you brainstorm or give you five possibilities or that kind of thing is great. And um, helping it help you see possibilities or ways to make things sharper or more clear or more engaging or more enticing to you as an outcome, for example, is one way that it can help. It can also give you a rough, usually somewhat accurate, somewhat inaccurate starting point for understanding what the steps of something might be, what the timing might even be to complete something like that. And sometimes it's a bit like sort of flipping a coin when you feel like you're 50-50 on a decision, and it comes up heads and you go, oh, actually, I really wanted it to be tails. And then you actually wanted tails and you go off and do tails, right? It's almost like it forces it by giving you the thing you didn't want to realize and clarify what you actually do want. So to me, these are some of the kind of creative ways to use LLMs in general is to use it sort of almost psychologically to get you into motion, to show you something rather than a blank page and you trying to figure out the starting point that you can kind of hit against, that you can play with. And of course, the other big innovation with the chat style large language models is that you can keep going. You can go, wow, that was terrible. Try something else. Give me something different, so on and so forth. So for that kind of thing in my GTD practice, I am what I call sparring with LLMs a bit more to try to get unstuck, and that kind of thing. It's like, hey, there's a lot of DIY to do a lot around the house, and I'm feeling stuck, and give me some creative ideas for how I might make this more fun. It was actually quite fun, quite interesting, and just that intention of wanting to make it more fun started to make it more fun and reflect me back some ideas that I thought were actually good and interesting, and I've actually incorporated into that project of supporting getting the house a bit more into shape.
It's really interesting. As you're talking about that, I'm just reflecting on the ways in which AI gets used in our household, and we found a couple of things. What one is, as a way to do, and this doesn't specifically relate to delegation, but it might be interesting to folks out there. Learning support, right? So if I'm looking for, and I think I quoted this in a meeting you and I had earlier, Robert, but one of the things that I'm using an AI for these days is I'm working on developing my French language skills. Okay, and I'm looking for just really one page once a day. My French is not great. My French is sort of restaurant level French, as I quite often say, so I can get myself fed. But it's and I can sort of understand what's going on in conversations when I hear them. But what I've asked an LLM to do is to basically just produce for me, some random topic from culture, from history, from music, from the arts, from whatever. I've tried to steer clear of politics, just to make it a fairly low stress sort of experience. But I ask the AI to give me a page of French sentences and then English translations, and I just rerun that prompt over and over again, and I get fresh content. And it's been a really it's been a really helpful way, I think, for me to get exposed to a bit of French on a daily basis. And the other example that came to mind for me, something else that we delegated, as it were, to the AI not long ago, was my wife Debbie she was getting ready to do some iron some of her clothes, which she really 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 doesn't like doing, right? So we were talking about if you were going to have a playlist, right, to go along with your ironing, what would be on it? And we did a little bit of back and forth about, okay, what kinds of, there's a song she likes that's called Wrinkles in Time, and that could go on the list, and I don't remember whatever all bad examples we got, but we just threw it to the AI, and the AI came back with 2 pages of things that made us smile and made us laugh. So it's back to your point about just sort of getting things going. I think about quite often, in GTD coaching, more generally, you'll be in a situation with a client where you're they're struggling to come up with the next action on something, right? They just don't know. Like, they know what the outcome is, they know what the finish line is, but they're really struggling with, what's my next action? How am I going to use this? How am I going to get this going forward? And what's interesting for me is, what I've typically done in those coaching situations quite often is to ask the client, hey, if you were going to have a conversation with somebody about this, who would you have a conversation about? Who do you trust? Who do you respect? Who's got a relevant experience, whatever? And that quite often can get people unstuck. But I think in those situations these days, I'm as likely to say, hey, let's throw that question to ChatGPT, or whichever LLM you're using, and see what it might come up with. So, back to your point, I love the word unstuck, because I think it can be used in that way very effectively as well.
Yeah, yeah. And what's really interesting to me is that there have been kind of three really major waves of innovation in neural networks that have got us to where we are now. One, back in must have been the 90s, this thing called backpropagation, which just means training all the bits and pieces on what it got right and wrong. The most recent one that really got us, our modern LLMs, is called attention. And that just means prioritizing what you're looking at before you feed it to what are called neurons that then go and do tiny little bits of calculation. But the third thing, most recently, that really gave us breakthroughs in how to take existing LLMs and make them highly specialized in ways that are much better, even though the baseline model itself wasn't very good to begin with, is something actually very human. It's called step back prompting, and basically what it means is the LLM tries up until this point to fulfill your request in one, right? It's basically been trained on, let's call it call and response on the internet. When this comes in, that's the next thing that follows. And when this comes in, that's the next thing that follows. And the internet's full of questions and answers. So it largely knows how to do question and answer type stuff. But it tries to do it in one, and it tries to do it to the extent that it more or less, it looks like a complete answer and then it stops. Or sometimes it has what are called stop rules that stop it from just going on and on endlessly and wasting the resources of the provider. But with step back prompting, what we're saying is, okay, well, here's a thorny issue. Let's break this down for me into several steps, and I want you to just complete the very first step of solving this problem or relating with it to this issue or whatever. Now I want you to take the fact that you've taken that first step, and bearing in mind our outcome, I want you to take what would be the second step and just focus on that, and then just give me output there. And it takes longer. It's not done in one, but the answer is phenomenally better from a sort of reasoning and benchmarking of AI agents standpoint than the done in one type of answer necessarily. But so this to me, I think, is really fascinating in terms of how we in GTD practice also focus our mind on a single next action, really focus on what it would look like to do a good job there, and then move on to the next, and then move on to the next, always keeping in mind that final outcome. So, in a way, um, the way that we prioritize resources for our own cognitive load when we're doing a GTD practice is very, very similar to what they found as a kind of third breakthrough in a way that has brought us DeepSeek and is going to bring us lots and lots of highly specialized models that'll be trained in very specific domains from this point forward. Is very much something that that really matches cognitive science, right? Backpropagation and attentional heads, those don't exist in our brain, but we know very much from cognition that breaking things down into steps, focusing on the discrete steps, never losing sight of the final outcome, is one of the most efficient, stress-free, but also highly effective ways to use our own mind. So I just find that fascinating, and I think there's a lot of implications there for how we delegate, how we relate to AI models, that parceling it and packaging it in a way that just that can be dealt with without losing sight of why it's being dealt with, the ultimate outcome there, is way, way, way more effective than what we do when we get overwhelmed, which is look at the whole thing and go, well, gosh, that looks really big. I think I'll go, raid the fridge for another piece of cheese instead.
I'm not, and I absolutely am. Yeah, I'm supportive of that approach from time to time. I guess the what I we're coming sadly to the end of our time, and I'm what I'm thinking might be helpful for folks would be for especially for folks who maybe maybe they're using some form of AI in the work they're doing already. Maybe they're not. Maybe even if they are using AI in the work that they're doing, they haven't really thought too much about how that could integrate with their productivity practice, right? So would you well, what would you recommend in terms of just getting them started? What tools, what approaches, where would you say, okay, go here first? And what do you say to that?
Yeah, I would say if you're wanting to start dabbling with how AI can help you in terms of your effectiveness practice, let's call it that. Probably some version and elements of GTD are in there if you're listening to this. Start with the free stuff and start with real pain points. Things where you go, yeah, I feel a little stuck on that, or I could use a fresh perspective, or I'm not quite sure what to do there next, and relate to it clearly as you would someone that you're as an intern, right? The infinite interns metaphor seems increasingly to be a really good one for how to relate to these agents. So you can do things like give it a role. So before you'd have to delegate to someone specific. Now you can delegate to the head surgeon at the whatever, and ask them a medical question, or so on and so forth, and it'll sort of access that part of the internet it's been trained on. Tell it why you're doing what you're doing, bit of context. Examples are great, giving it some examples of what good output would look like, giving it a very clear outcome, potentially doing a bit of step back of saying, help me break this down into steps. Um, but of course, also bearing in mind privacy, right? Bear in mind that if you are putting something up onto the web, yes, they do have certain privacy policies and so on and so forth. But we've seen things where the large language models are auto completing someone's secret API key because it got trained on that, and so on and so forth. So there are leaks, there are issues with privacy. Um, Increasingly, we're going to see these things running locally, but that's an aside. So I would say have a play with something free, like the ChatGPT free or DeepSeek or one of those on the web, with some real issue that you have. Again, giving it some specific parameters for how you want it to help you, and then have fun. See if you can get to an outcome that you wouldn't have thought of yourself. That's actually helpful and useful to you. I think that's where we are today. And increasingly, agents are going to be able to do all kinds of integrations from this point forward. But right now, if you're just getting started, if you just want something free and easy and accessible, have a play. Have a play with an LLM.
Great. That's great. Thank you, Robert. And for all of those of you out there, obviously, AI is continuing to evolve and change, and we at Next Action Associates are going to do our level best to help you to navigate in this new world. We're uh, using quite a few of the tools ourselves. We're seeing how other people are using quite a the tools themselves, and over time, we're going to be continuing to come your way with guidance and advice about all of this. So if you have questions, if you have comments about how AI affects your productivity practice, do get in touch. We'd be very, very happy to hear from you. For now, though, please do like and subscribe if you're interested in hearing about future episodes of this. And we also do, as we quite often say, take requests, whether it's about AI or whether it's about anything else. Please do let us know if there's anything you want us to be talking about in these podcasts. So for now, from Robert and from me, we hope this was helpful, and we'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.